Using taxes to punish the rich in reality punishes everyone because we're all interconnected. High taxes and excessive regulation and massive debt are not working. This isn't just Democrats. It's Democrats and Republicans that have been piling on the debt, but the debt is a burden for you. The debt is an impediment to you getting a job when you leave here. The economy's been growing at less than 1% and actually contracted in the last quarter of last year. I would argue that the objective evidence shows that big government is not a friend to African Americans. Big government relies on the Federal Reserve, our central bank, to print money out of thin air. Printing money out of thin air leads to higher prices. When the prices of gas rise to $4 a gallon, it's a direct result of your government's debt. When food prices rise, it's a direct result of $50,000 we borrow every second. Inflation hurts everyone, particularly the poor. If you're struggling to get ahead, if you have student loans and personal debt, you should choose a political party that wants to leave more money in the private sector so you'll get a job when the time comes. Some Republicans, let's call them the moss-covered variety, mistake war for defense. They forget that Reagan argued for peace through strength, not war through strength. The old guard argues for arming Gaddafi, and then the next year they argue that we want boots on the ground to defeat Gaddafi. They've got to be involved everywhere all the time. I want you to know that there are Republicans who don't clamor for war, that many Republicans believe in a strong national defense that serves to preserve the peace. In Louisville, in the predominantly African-American west end of town, it was recently announced that 18 school districts are failing, or 18 schools. The graduation rate from high school is 40%. The head of Kentucky's education called it academic genocide. Johns Hopkins researchers call these schools dropout factories. I defy anyone to watch Waiting for Superman and honestly argue against school choice. A minister friend of mine in the West End calls school choice the civil rights issue of our day. I think he's right. By the 6th grade, Ronald Halassi was failing most of his classes, but through school choice, he was able to attend a Catholic school here in D.C. There he learned that he had a natural gift for composing music. For that, he wasn't even reading. His reading level was so low that he struggled to even write lyrics. Ronald then went on to matriculate at Barry University. There are countless examples of the benefits of school choice. Talk to the parents of these kids. Look at the kids that were interviewed in the movie Waiting for Superman. Maybe it's about time we all reassess blind allegiance to ideas that are failing our children. Every child in every neighborhood of every color, class, and background deserves a school that will help them succeed. Those of you assembled today are the American success stories. You will make it and do great things. But in every neighborhood, white, black, or brown, there are kids who are not succeeding because they simply made mistakes or they messed up. They had kids maybe before they were married or before they were old enough to support them, or they got hooked on drugs, or they simply left school. Republicans are often miscast as uncaring or condemning of kids who make bad choices. I, for one, plan to change that. I'm working with Democratic senators to make sure that kids who have made bad decisions, such as nonviolent possession of drugs, are not imprisoned for lengthy sentences. I'm working to make sure that first-time offenders are put into counseling and not imprisoned with hardened criminals. We should not take away anyone's future over one mistake. Let me tell you the story of two young men. Both of them made mistakes. Both of them were said to have used illegal drugs. One of them was white, from a privileged background. He had important friends, an important father, and an important grandfather. You know, the kind of family who universities name dorms after. This family had more money than you could count. Drugs or no drugs, his family could buy justice if he needed it. The other man also used illegal drugs, but he was of mixed race and from a single-parent household with little money. He didn't have important friends or a wealthy father. Now, you may think I'm going to tell you a story about racism in America where the rich white kid gets off and the black kid goes to jail. It could be, and often is, but that's not this story. In this story, both young men were extraordinarily lucky. Both young men were not caught using illegal drugs, and they weren't imprisoned. Instead, they went on to become presidents of the United States. Barack Obama and George Bush were lucky. the law could have put both of them away for their entire young adulthood. Neither one of them would have been employable, much less president. Some argue with evidence that our drug laws are biased, that they are the new Jim Crow. But to simply be against them for that reason misses a larger point. They are unfair to everyone, white, black, brown, largely because of this idea that one size fits all, this idea that federal sentences should have no discretion. Our federal mandatory minimum sentences are simply heavy-handed and arbitrary. They can affect anyone at any time, though they disproportionately affect those without the means to fight them. We should stand and loudly proclaim, enough's enough. We should not have laws that ruin the lives of young men and women who have committed no violence. That's why I've introduced a bill to repeal mandatory minimum sentences. We should not have drug laws or a court system that disproportionately punishes the black community. The history of African American repression in this country rose from government-sanctioned racism. It's important to remember that, from government-sanctioned racism. Jim Crow laws were a product of bigoted state and local governments. Big and oppressive government has long been the enemy of freedom, something black Americans know all too well and on a personal level. We must always embrace individual liberty and enforce the constitutional rights of all Americans, rich and poor, immigrant and native, black or white. Such freedom is essential in achieving any long-standing health and prosperity. As Toni Morrison said, write your own story. Challenge mainstream thought. I hope that some of you will be open to the Republican message that favors choice in education, a less aggressive foreign policy, more compassion regarding nonviolent crime, and encourages opportunity in employment. And when the time is right, I hope that African Americans will again look to the party of emancipation, civil liberty, and individual freedom. Thank you very much.
First of all, let our students speak, and please question, not speak. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you got it? Okay. Yes, sir. And then we'll go over here.
Thank you, Senator Paul.
If you'll tell me your name and where you're from.
My name is Joshua Matfis. I'm actually a student at American University.
Okay.
And thank you for coming out. During your speech, you mentioned that you have support, that you want a government that leaves you alone. And you've been one of the fiercest opponents of federal interference with local autonomy and local rights. So how can you justify killing last year's D.C. budget autonomy bill and also interfering with the local legislation of our locally elected government?
Good question. First of all, when partisans discuss an issue, sometimes you only hear one side. So I'll tell you the other side of this. I didn't kill any D.C. autonomy bill. They could have had a vote at any point in time. I have no power to stop any legislation. I'm in the minority, and I put on amendments that they did not want to vote on. So they perceived that as killing the bill, but my intention was to get votes on some amendments. And they have the majority. The Democrat majority could have easily voted mine down, but they didn't choose to vote on them. So it's kind of interesting. Like right now we're having this gun debate, and they say, oh, I'm preventing the debate from happening. I'm not preventing any debate from happening. They just have to agree to vote and to move forward. They chose not to vote. On D.C. autonomy, I'm of two minds. Do I think maybe D.C. could have more autonomy? Maybe. But I also know that the Constitution put D.C. under Congress's purview, and that we give D.C. money from the rest of the country, from the tax receipts. So I think that oversight on the money that we spend, it is incumbent. It's a responsibility of the Constitution and a budgetary responsibility that we have oversight on the money that we spend from the U.S. Treasury in D.C. So I think it is a tough road to walk, but I'm willing to look at budgetary authority and see if we can come to a resolution.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
My name is Julian Lewis. I'm a senior political science major from Memphis, Tennessee, and I would just like to thank you for coming to Howard University and speaking with us. My question is, well, first of all, I'm a former White House intern for President Obama, and I would just like to say that the president is doing an excellent job. Just y'all have no idea. I'm being very sincere. I'm also a national field organizer for 1911 United. It's one of the only African-American super PACs for President Obama in the entire country. We helped raise over $80,000 for him. You said that the Republican Party is a big proponent of voting rights. And I have been traveling along with members of my organization all over the country, across 30 states, registering African Americans to vote at a higher rate in 2012 than in 2008, because the Republican Party has been using their state legislators and their governments to prevent African Americans from voting because they didn't want to elect President Obama. So I'm asking you, how can we believe what you're saying in regards to voting rights when we honestly feel, based on our intellectual ability to gauge whether you can connect with us or not, how can you say that to us?
Yeah. What I would say is, me being here today and me trying to open this dialogue is that I'm trying to say the Republican Party is interested in the African American community and trying to convince some that our ideas, maybe not all immediately, but some, that our ideas are the best for people having hope and jobs. As far as trying to prevent, I think it's important to know in the history what happened. Democrats in the South were very, very harsh. Almost all Democrats, okay? That's who ran the governments. And they did have tests at the polls, literacy tests and special tests. And guess what? If you were white and you came forward, you didn't have to do the test. If you were black, you had to do the test, and you didn't pass the test. People were scared and intimidated and preventing from voting. I think if you liken using a driver's license to literacy tests, you demean the horror of what happened in the 40s and 50s, maybe probably from 1910 all the way through 1960s in the South. It was horrific. Nobody is in favor of that. No Republican is in favor of that. But showing your driver's license to have an honest election, I think, is not unreasonable. And I think that's the main thing Republicans have been for.
Thank you, Senator, for coming. We really appreciate it. My name is Emmanuel Lewis. I'm a junior health sciences major here at Howard University and a member of the Howard University Royal Court. And my question is, I believe that we must first define which Republican Party. And this is what I want to ask you. Are we discussing Republican Party before 19th century Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln Republican Party, or are we discussing post-1968 Republican Party, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan? And my question for you is, which one do you identify with?
Right. I think that's a great question, and that hits the nail on the head exactly as to what our obstacles are, because people, including those who may have just clapped, perceive there as being completely different parties. And you don't object to the party of emancipation and voting rights and citizenship and all of that, of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The argument that I'm trying to make is we haven't changed. We don't talk about it. I'm either going to convince you or not, but my argument is there are some of us who haven't changed, who are still part of the party that you liked, but there are part of us who truly believe Reagan was still part of that we don't see an abrupt difference. We don't see all of a sudden, we see horrible Jim Crow and horrible racism that happened in the 30s, 40s, 50s. It was all Democrats. It wasn't Republicans. Now, did some of them switch over and become Republicans? Yes. But the Republican Party primarily were not those people.